because New Mexico just banned, essentially, the Second Amendment. Now, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham on Friday announced a new public health order in which she said that everybody will be prohibited for the next 30 days from carrying firearms either open or concealed in the city of Albuquerque and throughout the county for the next 30 days. Since declaring this new restriction, the governor has gone on record saying things like, we know that this is probably not constitutional and it will probably be overturned, but we have to do something. Now, this new restriction was placed on the Constitution of the United States by this governor as a result of an 11-year-old who was shot and killed in a road rage incident. Truly tragic. But to suspect yet again that if we just keep citizens from practicing their Second Amendment rights, that somehow this will stop people from being killed is ridiculous, because we all know what will actually happen here. Law-abiding citizens who, for all intents and purposes, don't want to break the law ever in their lives, are now being forced to make a decision. Break the law and potentially protect their family if something breaks off and they need to do that. Because the reality is that the people who have no regard for this restriction that was just placed upon the city of Albuquerque are not law-abiding citizens. It's the people who you protect yourself from who are going to benefit from this law the most. The people who have bad motives, the people who don't care about the law, the people who will carry a gun and shoot other people without regard to the sanctity of human life. These are the people who are benefited from this law, not law-abiding people who protect their Second Amendment rights. But more importantly, blue leadership also has no regard for the Constitution whatsoever, unless it benefits them. You know, the big conversation with Roe v. Wade was that there is a constitutional right for people to be able to terminate the life of their baby. And there are these suspicious and spurious arguments made as to why it is a constitutional right to kill a baby. But search the Constitution, folks, and you'll quickly find that actually, quick fact check. I know I'm not Snopes or Media Matters, but quick fact check. Actually, no official right to kill a baby in the Constitution. Sorry, our founding fathers actually read things like the Bible and felt like, maybe not the best to kill babies. But one thing you will find, obviously, illustrated in the Constitution is something called the Second Amendment, which gives the rights to people to bear arms. And of course, let me refresh your memory just in case you don't remember. The Second Amendment says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That seems pretty lock and key. Now, of course, here's the argument from people on the left or people who don't like the Second Amendment. They will often say, well, it's very clear that this is an amendment intended to try to regulate militias. That's what it says at the very beginning. Well, it says at the very beginning of that, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So in other words, ultimately, even if we take the argument at face value, we see that a civilian militia is necessary to institute a free state. The ultimate principle here is making sure we're ensuring freedom. That's the purpose of the Second Amendment. But ultimately, from who? From what? Of course, we know from what. Our founding fathers, when they wrote this Second Amendment, they were doing so on the basis of understanding that the government could go tyrannical, and that the government actually is the greatest domestic terror threat often in history. Now, I'm not going to even say that that is today, but if we're going to talk about domestic terror threats, maybe Biden should take a cue from the playbook of people like Ronald Reagan, who said, actually, the government is the problem. It's not people. People can actually sort through their own lives better than the government bureaucracies of the world can. But don't hold your breath waiting for Joe Biden to declare that the government is actually the biggest domestic terror threat to individuals, because he's too busy trying to fumble through words and the English language to actually come up with the stellar conclusion that white supremacy is the biggest domestic terror threat. Nonetheless, we see again the totalitarian tendencies of those on the left. First and foremost, the left, whenever they propose something, they always want you to do something. They always want you to pay the cost of whatever something is, but they never want to pay it themselves. Now think about the climate activist who wants you to fundamentally change your life and everybody else to change their life just so that they can feel a little bit better about themselves, but they're not actually interested in really taking the sacrifices necessary or thinking about the implications of what they're actually talking about in the third world. They want everybody else to do things, but aren't necessarily willing to do it themselves, because the fact of the matter is totally eliminating fossil fuels overnight may not be the hardest thing in the world for us in the first world, but it would be crushing to people in the third world. So they're not going to have to pay the consequences for that. But of course, they don't care. So the left wants you to do stuff that ultimately you're going to have to pay the price for. And this is also true in what this New Mexican governor is doing. But more importantly, this sets the stage for a precedent, and I talked about this on the show last week, a very dangerous precedent. It sets the stage for the creation of special powers for the sake of an emergency, so that emergencies will be created in the future for the sake of granting these people special powers. You guys remember Hillary Clinton saying that crisis is a great opportunity?
It is an old friend of mine and my husband's, and was in the White House when Bill was there, and he said, you know, never waste a good crisis.
That's because these people crave crisis. They need crisis because they need to be needed. In the midst of crisis, they can implement whatever strategies and policies and laws they want to try to solve those issues without ever having to admit that they might be the problem. So where does the idea that the government will be the saving grace of a people, that they can provide the salvation that we actually need in the midst of an emergency? Well, that comes from secularism, the thing we're talking about on the show today. The smaller God gets, the bigger the government gets, because we need something outside of ourselves to provide stability for us. And very often this is the way it works. In a post-Christian Western society that no longer looks to God for their salvation and help in the midst of an emergency, they look to the state to help them. And so the state finds it easier and easier to take the Constitution and wad it up into the waste bin of history and to declare whatever powers they think are right for the moment. Now, let me provide just a fictitious analogy, if you will, a scenario that probably will never happen, but just to try to illustrate the point here, let's just say a global pandemic comes upon the world, and all of a sudden our leading rulership class and bureaucracies in America all of a sudden kind of just defenestrate our Constitution and the laws and the ways in which we have, operated under common sense in the past, and they install, spurious and kind of far-reaching mandates that shove down ideas and laws and rules down people's throat that aren't actually based in real medical science. I mean, let's just say even some of these health officials that we're supposed to trust, issue mask mandates one second, and then they say that they won't help the next, and then they flip-flop on the issue of masks, and then later on you realize that actually masking doesn't really help when it comes to coronavirus. And ultimately that it could be like really devastating for children and have long-term health effects if prolonged mask wearing takes place. Now, again, none of this would ever happen, but all I'm saying is that the granting of special powers for the sake of emergency is nothing less than a machination of our secular age. And so the only remedy for this is to show up at the Capitol in New Mexico and to show up with an open carry. Only mass civil disobedience is going to be the way to stop these kind of tyrants from doing what they do.
So you just got done watching a small excerpt of a much larger episode. You can find the link to that full episode down below in the description of this video. So you definitely want to check that out, because if you like that clip, you'll like the much larger episode. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click that little bell to be notified when great new episodes of Indie Thinker come your way. Thanks for watching.